This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. The Disciplined Investor Podcast had me on recently. Andrew Horowitz is the host. What follows next is an interview that appeared on his podcast a few weeks ago. If you did not hear it then, you'll hear it now. I hope you enjoy.
And our special guest today is MICHAEL COVEL. Listen, he has an incredible amount of things that he's done in his life right now, living, enjoying the time overseas, which we're going to get into. He has an amazing bio that we grabbed off his site. It says he searches, he digs, he goes behind the curtain to reveal a state of mind that systems don't want you in. Mike, what does that mean? And welcome.
It means that most people have a mountain of propaganda shit thrown at them 24/7 nonstop today. And I'm not so sure how people, unless they have a serious background in media and politics, have any earthly idea what's going on.
Yeah. The old saying was, it's like trying to take a sip out of an open water hydrant, but a lot of people don't even know what that is these days.
Yeah, it's nonstop.
It's crazy. You are now living in Vietnam, hailing from the States many years ago. Tell me a little bit about journey over there, life over there, and then we'll get into some of the areas of investing.
I was in the States, 2012, started my podcast. I was talking about yoga. I was doing yoga, and a friend, an online friend working in a bank in Tokyo said, "Hey, why don't you come speak for my friend in Tokyo?" And his friend worked at CLSA, a Hong Kong broker. Got on the phone with him. They said, "Hey, where are you flying out of?" And for some reason or another, I said, "Well, I'm going to be already in Asia. We want you to come speak in Japan, but why don't you come speak for us in Beijing, Shanghai, KL, Singapore, you name it. We'll make it a 4-month tour." Twist my arm. These guys do it upright. I mean, I'm not sure what CLSA does today, but back in the day, they were doing it upright. They were all expenses paid. Good stuff. I went. I got about halfway in, and I was like, well, I'm not leaving Asia. Vietnam was not on the schedule. And I had a break, a window. And I said, well, I really didn't want to go there. You know, this is just the American thing. I was like, I just don't want to go there. You required a visa and all that kind of stuff. So I got the visa and I went. You walk out of that airport in Ho Chi Minh City and it's like the heat hits you. There's people everywhere. I mean, I don't understand any of the language. It's a real gut punch. Went to this quite famous hotel where all the journalists stayed at back in the day, called the Caravel. And I walked into that front door and two ladies, statuesque, wearing the Vietnamese algiai, the dress, both 10s, both gorgeous. They opened the door while I'm walking into this hotel and I'm like, I might have to stay here. I ended up living in that hotel for 6 weeks. I went back and did more of this speaking tour, but then at the end I was like, well, I'm not leaving Asia. I tried to live in Bali for a few weeks. That drove me crazy. And I said, where did I have the most fun in Asia? Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, Vietnam was the choice. It was quite simple.
It's an interesting place. I told you offline when we spoke a bit. I love it. They call the Vietnam War the American War there, of course, a little bit reversed. Quite a history, quite a lovely people. The funny thing is, and people that haven't been there should know, and we could talk about this because we know what it is. You have to actually take lessons and really be straight about you when you consider crossing a street in Vietnam. It's like playing Frogger for real.
Well, for an inexperienced chap like yourself.
Yes, of course.
I generally walk through the traffic these days texting and not paying attention. Don't ask me how that happens, but it does because they're not trying to kill you. They're not trying to kill you. And once you get that, you're like, okay, just walk with purpose and they will weave around you.
That commentary right there, I think is pretty fascinating to segue, and this wasn't a setup, into the next area. And let's talk about trend following, talking about weaving in and out and not getting run over. I mean, I think that's a perfect way to talk about some of the things that are happening these days because markets are very unkind to certain areas, and yet other areas that may be a bit unexpected have been doing very well. It's a tale of many worlds right now. And obviously, as you mentioned, the information that you're getting over the news wires and information from various governments is nothing but confusing. And frankly, to a point, you question the legitimacy. I mean, really question the legitimacy of a lot of the things that you see these days.
I question the legitimacy of everything. We are completely in a world of nonstop agendas, messaging, propaganda. If someone doesn't understand that and they're trying to make bets, market bets, money bets with their hard-earned capital, and they're trying to do that based on voices they might hear on CNN or Fox or Bloomberg or CNBC, if they're trying to make bets on that, good luck. I mean, you might as well go to Vegas. Vegas might be more fun. Macau's even more fun than Vegas. Just skip it. Just skip the market crap and go straight to the good times.
You wrote a book, and that's one of the things that kickstarted all this, as you mentioned, back in 2012 with the podcast and all the things that were going on. And you have this whole concept called trend following. Trend following research, the name of your company and that what you do, a trend following this concept. You talked about it. Last time you were on was 2015. So let's pretend that we're really rusty here, that we have no idea what the hell this means. The listeners are thinking about the idea of, okay, well, in this kind of environment, well, what kind of trend is there? Where do I even start? How do I even know what to look at? There's a lot of confusion. I'm not even talking about the new investor, the newbie who doesn't really care about the money. I don't know about you. Something I've been talking about lately is the immature feel of the markets right now. Very newbie trader. And I mentioned on a recent podcast, and by the way, just to let you know, just to throw it out there, you talked about your podcast back in 2012. Started this in 2007, this podcast, back in the day when my publisher for my book said, hey, why don't you think about promoting your book through a podcast? And I replied, what the hell is a podcast? But you see a lot of things happening and the changing dynamic of the listener and all. It seems like people don't really care about their money anymore. They're just throwing it out there. Do you get that sense for a lot of people?
It all depends on which individual we're talking about. But if I was to take an explanation, just a real simple explanation of trend following, imagine you're on a desert island. You don't have anything except the ticker tape, and you get a daily closing price for, let's say, the biggest equities, all the currencies, the metals, the commodities, the ags. You get these closing prices each day. That's all you got. You can call your broker to place buys and sells. Now, what do? If that's the only information you've got, you can watch the tides come in and out. You can maybe go catch a fish. Otherwise, all you've got is the closing prices for major markets each day. Can you use that information to trade effectively? Which means you have no information except that. That's where trend following comes into play, because trend following is using only that information to trade. If someone describes the current situation with some, and I can't remember the word you just used, but some type of kind of emotional feeling, well, we could probably go back in time and find some emotional description for every period in time. I mean, right now, historically, okay, with inflation, et cetera, but potential World War III, this does seem to be a little bit of a heightened moment. But you can't allow yourself to trade off that, because then you're just gambling. So the issue becomes, when all of this starts to happen, you have to have in place something that allows you to take advantage of these commodity moves, that allows you to take advantage of when Facebook, or whatever they're calling it now, Meta, drops 50%. The strategy has to be in place before it happens. If you're sitting there getting panicked when it's all going one way or the other, and you don't know what to do, that's like a cue to maybe step back. Markets are always going to be there, but come back with a strategy.
Let's talk about the trend of what happened with energy commodities, pick your poison in terms of any of that pool. And we're using closing prices and we're using some information. What do we do with that? What is actually the factors? Because when do we know that the trend is actually real versus a false start versus just a hiccup?
Well, trend following has an entry mechanism and it's a momentum mechanism. And typically you're going to find with a trend following strategy, when you take a trade, maybe you're going to have 40% winners, 60% losers, but you're going to have winners that are 3 times larger than your losers. Everybody can go crunch some math and they can see it's a positive mathematical expectation. Energy markets went up. They went up big. Then they came down. They've come down big just in a couple of days. With trend following, what you're looking to do is you're never going to get in early. You're never going to get out at the top. What you're looking to do is capture the middle meat of a move. So you say, well, how can I stop a false signal? You can't, because you don't know what's going to happen. So you got to take the signals as they come. That's where the 60% losers end up coming.
When we talk about trend following, I guess, is another word that you would use to describe it momentum trading, the trading on what is moving at this moment versus, I guess the opposite side would be fundamental/thematic even?
I think academics started using the term momentum since yours truly pretty much has dominated the word trend following. Trend following is something I essentially looked around and said, well, gosh, this is what the industry calls it going back 100 years. This is what everyone that I have had a chance to learn from calls it. But I think the academics decided, well, let's call it momentum, or let's call it time series analysis, whatever they want to call it. But it's still trend following. It's not thematic. It's not macro. It's not using any fundamentals. Sometimes people might say, well, gosh, if I'm going to do this trend following you talk about, Mike, where I'm just going to take momentum signals, 40% winners, a lot of small losses. Well, why can't I improve that by my study of Mark Zuckerberg, his eating habits or whatever? Well, you can't. How do you add that into the mix? Where does all that extra data get added in? If you're on that desert island that I mentioned, if you're simply looking at the price data, well, you say, well, that's the only information I have, then I can make a buy and sell decision off that. Everything's baked into the price. That's a tough thing for the fundamental folks out there to believe in. I'm not really sure how in 2022 a belief in the fundamentals really makes much sense.
There's a lot that goes into that because you look at the trend of, I use the word trend in a much different way here, of this ESG nonsense. I was asked to a luncheon a few years back. It was a group that was introducing this idea of this ESG, this whole idea that we are going to make a world a better place. If so, and that's going to happen, we have a rating system. By the way, that rating system is something that a lot of people are going to utilize to ferret out those companies that are the bad actors, those that are polluting, those that have poor governance and oversight. I'm like, what are you talking about? Are we going back to the days that we have the discussion over the sin stocks and how those, like casinos, the alcohol-related liquor, smoking, have done extraordinarily well over the years without all of this? And the fact that they're trading on the secondary market, and really, are you going to have that much pull over them by just shunning them? Are they going to change? I mean, a lot of the companies did the greenwashing and all that. When you look at some of the things that are happening these days in terms of the fundamentals, or some people call them the fundamentals, I do like the fundamentals on a trend basis from where we are. I like to look at those and understand those, build portfolios based on a lot of that, but there's a lot of other things that go into it. My point, though, is those fundamentalists that are out there, pure and simple, pure fundamentalists, buy and hold, there's going to be a great stock one day, which it may be, have situations where it looks really great to own Facebook, as you mentioned right now, but oh my, down 50% from its high recently. That's not trend following.
People need to know before they enter when they are going to exit. Or otherwise, if they don't want to think that way, then just be a buy and hold trader and be like Granny, and that's fine. Just go that route. By the way, just to add to your ESG thing, you should expand a little bit more on it if you want. You got to figure that the people that are behind that already made their fortune violating everything that was defined in this ESG nonsense. And now they've created this ESG framework to penalize everyone that's coming along next. Your general analysis there, I concur.
It's a nice thing. It makes me feel good. It's wonderful how we're going to invest in companies that are friendly to the environment, who are socially conscious, who have a good oversight on their boards and make sure that there's no funny business that goes on. The problem is once you set that up as an index and once you provide that to be, as you mentioned, a framework for doing business, we know there are things called footnotes in the various annual reports, quarterlies, et cetera. And those footnotes sometimes reverse everything that's in the actual document themselves. The greenwashing is the footnotes in the ESG compatibility profiles, allowing for companies to amass things like carbon credits to offset or to do things that are like, what? That doesn't make any sense, but they fit into the good ESG model, thereby getting them into the index, thereby getting companies to buy them because, hey, I only buy ESG quality companies. It's crap.
Let me add to that. Okay, if we understand all that, we still have to trade something. We still have to buy and sell something, whatever it's going to be, equities, commodities, currencies, whatever. We could have all of that information, all of that insight to know how it all came together. But at the end of the day, you still have to buy and sell. What's the best way to reduce all of the information to one data point to make consistent decisions? I would argue it's price.
My good friend Brian Shannon says it's only price that pays, and there is something to be said about that. He does a little bit more of a charting mechanism in all of this, but it makes sense, obviously, that let me just state this very, very plainly and see what you think. If it's going up, I want to be in it. If it's going down, I don't.
Or if it's going down and if it's workable, you can be short. I say the same thing generally, that if it's going up, you're long. If it's going down, you're short or out.
I've also said, I love a stock as long as it loves you.
Yeah, but okay, I need to reduce that though. The average Joe's thinking, okay, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do with that. You still got to reduce it to when do I buy and when do I sell? Get down to the engineering level of like Excel spreadsheet time. That's what I think is so nice about trend following. I'm sure people are listening right now. What I'm saying about trend following goes right over their head. With trend following, there is all of these textbooks that they use at the universities to teach you about CAPM and all this other kind of stuff. None of that is relevant to trend following, which just causes a lot of people to kind of, what is this guy talking about? This sounds, I don't know, a little fishy or something. Trend following is just trading numbers. Yeah, it's just trading numbers.
But it's not a one-day ordeal. It's not like, okay.
It's not day trading, no.
Right. As a matter of fact, there's a quote on your site. It's from Paul Samuelson. Investing should be more like watching paint dry or watching grass grow. If you want excitement, take $800 and go to Vegas, which you mentioned before. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean buy and hold.
Paul Samuelson, a Nobel Prize winner, as you mentioned, MIT guy, he was the founder, one of the first funders of Commodities Corporation, which was the commodity trading advisor, another name for trend following back in the day, that housed almost 50% plus of the traders that Jack Schwager profiled in his Market Wizards books. Basically, Commodities Corporation was all trend followers. Samuelson was out there with this great econ background, making everyone go, my gosh, the guy's just brilliant. But with his money, he said, let me invest in trend following. And that's not something widely known.
The other thing is that I think what you mentioned at the top, where oftentimes you talked about the island, you talked about the concept of looking just at price, forgetting everything else, but you also talked about all the news and all the things that come and hit you in the face. It's very difficult to get away from that. Let's weave in how this yoga for you helps to possibly clear some of that.
Yes, for sure. Yoga helps to clear a lot. I think being out of the States helps to clear a lot. Yeah. I think not hearing English all day long helps to clear a lot. Seriously. I don't like hearing English all the time. Because let's face it, most people, especially in my home country, I mean, now that we've got social media, everybody's a journalist. Everybody has an opinion.
How much of a mistake was that in life? Allowing anybody at all to say whatever they want, regardless of how reckless it is, and give them a platform to reach out to as many people as possible.
It's definitely interesting. I think it's probably just as reckless that there are people out there that are supposedly fact checkers that are nothing more than another agenda source out there. Look, I was recently censored for the first time in my life. A Facebook post, no commentary from me, linking to a CDC government report with the .gov extension. The AI algorithms at Facebook did not like that, and I was suspended for a couple of days, put on a 30-day, I don't know what, newsfeed drop. I lost interest. I thought to myself, what is going on here? I mean, this has got to be happening to billions of people. If you say the wrong word, this is not a good thing. And this is, in the current format of America, there is some partisanship to it, but it is an equal opportunity employer. This is a tricky thing. Everybody gets a megaphone, but now we've got gatekeepers that own the megaphones.
That's the next problem, of course. But let's get back to yoga for a second. I will tell you, I did yoga. I tried yoga. I attempted. And I was sitting there and I'm in some position of some sort. They said, Andrew, we want you now to turn your upper torso to the left and rotate backwards. I said, listen, I don't know what you're thinking. I am like twisted around like poltergeist right now. They said, you're not even moved. I'm like, I am telling you, my top of my body is around the other side of my bottom of my body. They're like, Andrew, you're facing forward. I'm like, this hurts too. That was the end of my yoga career. Much harder than it seems. You know, everybody has their thing. During yoga, meditation, what do you use to give you the ability to withstand certain either influences that really are not good or some kind of opportunities that exist to help you really reach forward and give yourself the sound base?
So if I do yoga, it's hardcore, it's hot.
I've seen it, by the way. You're twisted.
It's strenuous. You sweat out when it's over. I'm not any good at sitting there Indian style doing any kind of a meditations. my meditation is the only way I can clear my mind in yoga is at some point in time in that practice, that hour or 90 minutes, you stop thinking. I don't know how it happens exactly, but that's what happens. You just stop thinking. You then end up focusing on what you're doing, and whatever you were thinking about just stops. Maybe it's something like REM sleep or something almost in a similar way. It's just a mind cleansing. I will also offer, I've got a natural hack on this. I was a baseball catcher from age 10 to 20. If you're in the Asian squat for 10 years, I'm a big white guy, but that definitely helped me. Looking back now, 30 years later, that flexibility I still have. I mean, come on, how many guys my age can do the full splits?
That's a good point. I know I'm going to come off kind of stupid on this. You will know, and you can help me with this. But in Asia, when you're out and about in Asia, there's a lot of people squatting. They do a lot of squatting. It is a relaxation, immobility, timeout position that they do. Why is there not more Asian catchers? I've always wondered this.
Well, there probably are in Japan and Taiwan.
Oh, in Japan. Yeah, but I'm saying the U.S., they're naturally squatting.
There's not a lot of Asian guys playing in Major League Baseball. There's only a handful. There's been a couple catchers over the years that have, often these days, a lot of Dominican guys, frankly. I don't necessarily know that there's any genetic component with it because, I mean, most of my family, if I visit, I tell them, hey, bend over and touch your toes. They get their hands to their knees and that's it. I'm completely different. It's not genetic. It's just practice.
People can touch their toes?
I could probably stand on 2 blocks and put my hands flat on the ground.
I've actually seen some of your yoga pictures and there's legs where arms are supposed to be and arms where your back is. And I'm like, wow, that's impressive.
There's some pain there, you know.
Which is probably why I don't do it. With the volatility on the rise right now and all that we're seeing in the world with the pick whatever you want. It doesn't have to be the war. It doesn't have to be COVID. It doesn't have to be the pandemic. Political instability. None of that. Any changes that need to be made for the trend following conscript? The idea that you have put forth?
No.
Okay, I'm just asking.
It just keeps working. Every couple of years, somebody will write an article. They'll say trend following is dead. And then 100% returns come out of, quote, nowhere, which is essentially what's happened in the last 2 years. It's something where when the equity markets are just kind of going up and the Fed's kind of engineering everything and there's zero interest rates, the average Joe can't figure out why he's made so much money in Apple and how he got to possibly live in a $1.5 million McMansion. And then all of a sudden, the giver becomes the taker. Then it goes away. We've seen this twice in the last 20 years. We saw the dot-com bubble. We saw the Great Recession. And hell, we could be in the middle of it again right now. Now, that's not a prediction. It's just observation. Things are definitely volatile. And I would just implore upon people, have a strategy. If you don't know what markets you're going to follow, when you're going to enter, when you're going to exit with a loss, when you're going to exit with a gain, and how much you're going to bet on every trade, okay, maybe you don't have all that information. But if you don't have all that information, just realize that the people you're competing against do have that information. It's like the guy out there that thinks he's going to be the day trader on 5-minute bars or 1-minute bars.
No, ticks.
Right. And they don't realize that Jim Simons exists. Jim Simons exists on Long Island to eat your lunch. You'll never beat that. People have got to figure it out and learn, and I'm sure some people never do.
I get calls from people all this. I'm trying to use 1,000 tick chart. I'm like, huh? Why? I don't understand.
Where does it come from? Who is pushing this stuff? Is there an underground world that we don't know about where they get the initial idea? Where does it come from?
I think it is all about, they look at a chart or something like that. They look at a specific span of time that happened to be maybe just good for that. And then, if I would have bought there and then sold there, like perfectly. And then I would have shorted there and bought there. I don't know. I don't understand the whole thing.
Safety and the quickness of the charters. I don't get it either.
They forget about the ranges are not there either. And the data is not there. More data, better patterning, if you will.
I visited a guy in Singapore a couple years ago, and he was trading at the speed of light, whatever it was. I went into his office with him, and he had just armies and racks, armies of coders and traders, racks of PCs everywhere. I mean, the guy had millions upon millions of dollars just in his tech. He was probably a smaller shop. I just think the idea of competing against in that world, that's tough.
It's crazy. Let's go back for a second. I'll mention that all the information about how to get in touch with Mike and everything that he does at Trend Following and his books and his courses, all that information will be on the show notes for episode 758 over on thedisciplinedinvestor.com. So make sure to check that out because some really cool things. He does some coaching and teaching and books. Let's talk about another book, The Complete Turtle Trader. That's something also, right?
Yeah, that's probably my most popular book. Actually, I'm very impressed. I just realized that it passed, I mean, it sold a ton of copies. I knew that already, but it passed 1,000 reviews on Amazon. I was like, damn, it's like living on its own. It's out there in some kind of viral mentality where people just find it. Seriously, it's alive on its own now. It's wild.
Tell me a little bit about that book.
Back in the early 80s, there was two big traders, George Soros and Richard Dennis. Richard Dennis, most people probably have not heard about today, but he was as big as Soros back in the day. He made a couple $100 million by age 37. Early 80s, him and his partner went and saw the famed movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd. They walked out of that movie, and this guy, Rich's partner, Bill, said, Rich, you're a savant. We can never take people off the street and teach them to be you. And he said, oh, no, we could. So they made a bet. They put ads in the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and they hired novices. Basically, people said, hey, you want to be a trainee? Come work for us. And they narrowed it down to 20, took this group of 20, gave them 2 weeks of training in trend following rules. They put them in an office down the street in Chicago, staked them with capital. 4 years later, the group of 20 had made, I think it was $100 million, maybe it's a little bit more, I can't remember. So it was this great nurture versus nature thing. It really showed that, okay, these trend following rules can be given to people. And if you stick with them, you will do well. The interesting thing about that story is that the most successful of those students, which were nicknamed the Turtles by Richard Dennis because he supposedly had been to a turtle breeding farm in Singapore and wanted to grow traders like they grew turtles there. But the most successful of these, quote, turtle traders was a guy named Jerry Parker, who's been on my podcast quite a bit, and he's still going. His fund is still going. It's just an amazing story. What's cool about the story, too, is that even though they did well under his umbrella for this 4 years, when they went on their own, a lot of them started hedge funds, some retired and made a lot of money, but a lot of them, a decent number, failed. You've got this guy, Jerry Parker, who's super successful, has taken all these lessons from the early 80s and made a life out of it, but some of them could not do it, could not hack it. I mean, truly just fell off the side of the car, so to speak.
Once they detached from the mothership.
Yeah. But on the flip side, that's just one group of trend following traders. I mean, there are so many examples. People wanted to really study who came before them, all these traders that have done well for decades and decades. And it's a hell of a learning lesson to dig in that information.
It is pretty fascinating. Let me talk about your podcast for a second, because you are, as you mentioned, been doing a podcast for a number of years. You've had some great guests on, some people and discussions. And what do you get out of doing your podcast?
I get to choose who I get to talk to. If somebody calls me up and says, hey, would you like to speak with XYZ Nobel Prize winner? Well, yours truly here gets that opportunity. I get to speak to Robert Aumann, who won the prize for game theory, which helped to figure out the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the day. Or I get to speak with Mr. Rosenberg, who started Dunkin' Donuts. Where do you get this opportunity from? This is fantastic. All these academics that sometimes I might have a visceral reaction to academics in terms of, okay, if I had to be in their class, if I had to be their student. But most academics that donate their life to a particular niche topic, they've got something interesting to say.
And passion.
Absolutely. You might not agree with it. They got something interesting to say. And I pivoted years ago. I stopped doing only trading conversations and I went to every topic under the sun.
I enjoy that too. One of the things I always say is, where do I get the opportunity to speak to people from not only all over the world, but really from all areas of the business world? Really learn from them. It's not necessarily, sorry, dear listeners, but it's not necessarily always for the listener. It's just a conversation that I get to have. And then, yeah, we're recording it and putting it out there.
Oh, I agree completely. I don't care if anyone listens to mine. I don't care at all. I do it for me. I thoroughly enjoy it.
That's what I'm saying.
I thoroughly enjoy it. I mean, I'm not being arrogant. I'm not being a jerk or anything. I mean, yes, it's nice that people listen and there's millions of listens and all that kind of fun stuff. That's cool. And I respect that. And I appreciate that people enjoy it, but I do it for me.
One of the things I found over the years is when I have people that are, I would say, either high-end people in, I don't know, governmental areas. I had the former Treasury Secretary or the Undersecretary of this or whatever it is. They're usually the most boring of all. It's usually somewhere out of an unknown that pops a really fascinating discussion. Have you found that?
100%. A guy named Henry G., who's the editor of Nature, British guy, anthropologist, I'm not sure, archaeologist, just fascinating guy. I mean, some of these guys involved in archaeology and fossils and whatnot, these guys are just fascinating. I had Jack Horner on my podcast, the guy who's the foundation for the Jurassic Park films. These kinds of people that just find their way into these niche areas. And I'll add to it too. I said this to a guest the other day. The older people are more interesting. I mean, if I talk to one more 30 or 40 something that's thinking about every word they say, every word that comes out of their mouth, they're thinking about, they're checking to see if it's okay in their mind, and they end up saying absolutely effing nothing.
Right. Let me close on this item because you mentioned the movies. One of the credits that you have and that you have on your bio is film director. Tell me about that.
Yeah, 3 years of my life. Did a film right around the Great Recession time. Came out probably before most of the other films. And it was the attitude you're hearing right now in a film called Broke, the New American Dream. I will probably end up having a sequel, not a market sequel, but I would not be surprised if the country I'm living in ends up getting a documentary film out of me.
Interesting. Well, next time in Vietnam, I am going to make sure to visit. We'll spend some time together, get some good eats, some good drinks, some good times. Michael Covevel, can't say your name right, but people know it.
Somebody goofed it up somewhere and it stuck with a lot of people. I don't know where it got goofed up, who goofed it up.
It looks like Covevel the way you spell it.
It might have been Barry Ritholtz who first goofed it up. I could give Barry shit because I think Barry might have been one of us that goofed it up first.
It could be. He was on one of my podcasts very early on. And I remember one of the things he said when we first did a podcast, because he didn't know what it was, he said, "Oh, I listened to myself. My God, I am nasally." I said, "Yep, Barry, that's what you sound like." He went off to do his thing and all that and get a group with that whole Bloomberg and all that. So good stuff. So Mike, listen, everybody, go check out the podcast show notes. Also, where can people find more information about you?
Trendfollowing.com.
Trendfollowing.com. It's that easy. Michael Covevel, thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, Trend Following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.